Hello there and welcome to Laurence Plays Factorio Planetary Pioneers, where we have 20 planets and 30 science packs and so on and so on. You've heard all of that before. And yes, we're talking about the steam science again over on Lignumis. And so this week's videos are going to be a little bit wibbly wobbly timey wimey, because in yesterday's video I was talking about how I got all this stuff around here set up and how I then realised I'd used the wrong plastic recipe over here. In today's video I'm going to be talking about how I fixed that, because actually another stream has happened in between the recording of those. And so, as you probably remember, in yesterday's video, I started using the Maluna recipe. I was bringing in wood, because we have loads of that on Lignumis, turning that into wood chip and then cellulose, turning that into petroleum gas and turning that and the cellulose into plastic, which I could then use to make the low density structures. And I still feel a little bit iffy about using gold and wood to make what's called a low density structure, but I'm trying very hard to gloss over that. And also to make the blue circuits. But now I've gone on and done the proper Lignumis recipe, which is very different and somewhat Gleber-esque. So this started, interestingly, over in the gold production area. So over here, at the end of the last video, you might have noticed that I talked about this being all a bit sort of wedged and sort of jammed up and not flowing quite as nicely as I would have liked. And down here, we didn't have enough gold flowing through, and that was the first part of the problem. And that was happening because a lot of these were clogged up, and this one still is clogged up. For some reason, a load of moist stromatolite seems to get through every so often. And I can't remember if I've actually properly fixed that yet. Oh yes, it's over here. So it's now being pulled out here. Yes, so that was happening because the recipe changed. So this was not my fault. Honest, Gov. So previously, when you crushed the gold ore to try and get the powdered gold out or the crushed gold out, you get out a bit of sand. And so we had a box here that was collecting the sand. However, then the recipe changed and it started producing moist stromatolite remnants instead. And then you can see there's a little bit coming out on this inserter here. If we look in here, it's very, very hard to tell with these because you can't just look in the machine and spot the recipe. I have to actually go into the Factoriopedia, and then here we see that gold ore goes to crushed gold ore, some gold ore, and some moist stromatolite remnants. So there we go, it's listed in there. But it's not actually listed in the machine because the crushers they're like furnaces. You don't set a recipe on them, so there's no tooltips to tell you exactly what the recipe is. They will just accept anything that they can crush and then deal with it appropriately. And so once I'd worked that out, it was trivial. I just came over here, changed the filter on the output here, and that means that moist stromatolite is then coming down here and being passed down into the disposal system down here, where it's getting cooked down and turned into peat, or alternatively just cooked down and and then chucked onto a belt over here to get rid of it. And yeah, it's all sort of basically fine. And so that was the first part of the problem sorted, and as you can see now we have a full belt of gold ore trying to make its way in over here. There seems to be a little bit of starvation going on over here. That's because we've got the filtering is done a little bit weirdly. I suppose technically we should be taking the gold ore from here and feeding it back round over this way to get it into these machines, but this was built up historically trying to jam extra stuff in a rather crowded area. I did a little bit of tidying as I was rebuilding. You'll notice the moist stromatolite is no longer being stockpiled in a box down here, for example. So the little fixes like that are helping quite a bit. The other thing that was giving us a problem with the gold is, well, when we do the gold farming, and I sound like a World of Warcraft player when I say things like that, it produces some moist stromatolite, it produces some gold ore, and it also produces the gold stromatolite seeds, these things. And so they all get unloaded by these machines as they're produced, and they all get dumped out onto the disposal belt, and they're going along here, as you can see. And then some of them need to be passed back round again and passed into the agricultural towers in order to grow more gold stromatolite plants. Apparently they're plants. They look kind of rocky, but they're plants. And so this is like many biological recipes. This is a net positive. So if you just keep feeding your system round and round and round, just letting it run, eventually you gather more and more of the seeds, and eventually it starts to choke. And we've seen that problem before on other planets, but that might be spoilers for this run, so I won't go into any more detail on that. But it's a thing that with biology you tend to plants, animals, things like that tend to want to try and continue their species by producing as much of whatever the thing is as possible. And so that meant that when I came back over here and went, why have we not got any gold? It was because the system was jammed up with the stromatolite seeds, and so that was causing problems, causing it to back up, and meaning things didn't work. And now you can see here that they are actually now flowing, so things are okay. I've got prioritization set on here, so they're being sent out down here first, and then they're being sent out to all of these plantations down here. So we should always make sure we've got plenty of seeds down here, and that's all fine. Then they're being run along here as the lowest priority, and there's enough of them flowing through here. They can go through, they can fill up all of these machines as much as is required. And the end here, well, we'll block the peat because we don't want that further down the chain. But we do actually, it turns out, we've discovered a use for the stromatolite seeds. So those are getting passed through here like that, and then they run all the way down this belt, all the way down here, to get put onto, and along here, and then they get fed into the new plastic system. And that's why I was talking about the gold first, because then this leads through to here, and we get the stromatolite seeds and the peat coming through, and water and wood juice, and all of those. When you feed all of those together, all 4 inputs, you can get Cupriavidus nicators, and this is the starter culture. So you can make them out of just these things, and it will happily run. It'll produce these weird Cupriavidus nicata. I don't even know what it's supposed to be, but it's sort of the gold equivalent of the iron bacteria and the copper bacteria that you see on Gleba, which is why I was sort of suggesting it's a bit sort of glebish. They then get passed out onto the belt here and then run into the system up here, which is the Cupriavidus nicator breeding reactors. And so that gets fed in. We've got, and here we've got a recipe that takes in the Cupriavidus nicators and some wood pulp and some water and produces a lot more of them. And the numbers in there, these are quite impressive. It takes in 10 and then it produces 45 on the output. So it's really, really net positive. That does really, really well. You can produce massive amounts of them very, very quickly. However, they have a very, very quick spoil timer on them. If we take a look at this, you can see they have a spoil time of 2 minutes, and then they turn into a dead Cupriavidus nicator. And those you can't breed, fairly unsurprisingly, really. But there is still some use for them, but you can't actually produce more with those. And so I've set up this roundabout system here that will pass them round on the belt here, with the idea of sending them back round this way to go round the belts. There's always more to feed in here to make the new ones. And I've got a system here where it's side loading onto the inside belt, or the port side of the belt, the inner one, with the inserters dumping onto the outside one, and that makes sure that there is always room to dump up for the inserters to unload from these machines, but always a supply of them on the inside of the belt for these to grab and put into here for the feeding purposes. Now, there is a slight risk that they could all die on the belt if we jam it up for long enough, and you can see the ones on the inside of the belt around here have all died. That's why they're the duller grey, because we've not been taking them in. But 2 minutes is easily long enough for, if the belt is moving, for them to get from about here to over to here. And so, because for reasons of, I guess, balance and sanity, the nicators do not die when they're still inside the machines. They don't start spoiling until you get them out and let them start running around out here. That means that if we do have an absolute crisis over here, if for some reason all of the ones on the belts die because this system stops running for 2 minutes, which is entirely feasible, I should say, then it's not going to actually matter, because the system can go to sleep for as long as we like, and then when it wakes up, because all of this gets pulled through, the dead ones will get quickly filtered out by this splitter here and dumped down this disposal chute over this way. And then the live ones will pour out and will very, very quickly come back round here, allowing these machines to start running again. So I'm pretty confident that we won't have any problems with this system jamming up and everything dying and then it not being able to restart. And this seems to be a thing that can be set per recipe. So with these ones, the mod author has been quite kind and quite generous, whereas some other things, so for example a lot of the stuff on Gleba, I remember that starting to go off as soon as it was made, even without it being taken out of the machine. So this is a little bit more generous and therefore a little bit easier, and I'm quite glad of that, because it just makes things, manageable. The next stage over here is then turning it into plastic, and there are 2 approximately equivalent recipes. There's this first one that takes in the live Cupriavidus nicators and produces plastic and wood pulp, and then there's this one over here that takes in the dead ones and produces plastic and wood pulp, and they're more or less the same recipe. This one takes in 100 nicators and produces 1 to 14. This one takes in 100 and produces 1 to 20. So you get slightly more from the living ones than you do from the dead, which is fair enough. Seems like a reasonable balance, to be honest. But not by an enormous margin, so it doesn't really matter. And quite a lot of the time we are just building from the dead ones over here, because I've got the system set up so that we prioritise from this side, because I don't want to overload on the dead ones, because if I do, I can see that leading to problems. If we can't get rid of the dead ones, then the whole system could jam up. So that was an important feature of the system. And I've done that by, well, if we follow this belt all the way down here, you'll see that the plastic bar is then fed in along here, and then when it goes up here to be made into blue circuits, it's fed in, and we're feeding it, we're side loading here, and that means anything that comes in on the port side is going to be prioritised over anything that comes in on the starboard side. You can see, there you go, those ones that came in then got used up before the ones that were on this side of the belt. So there you go, those queue up neatly, and then as soon as this pulls through any more, because we use some blue circuits, it will pull through the ones that are on the port side coming from the dead production before it will use the ones from the live production. When this inevitably turns out to be too slow, I can upgrade all of this to red belts. That's fine. That's sort of well within things I'm expecting to do at some point. But at the moment, the brown belts are actually doing absolutely fine at the rate we're chucking the science packs out at. One other note is that because I'm a little bit paranoid about the system getting to a point where it jams up because everything has died, I don't expect that to happen, as I said, but you never know, I might have made a mistake. It does happen occasionally. Okay. I've also then set up programming on the 2 machines down here that are making the doing the starter culture, turning the gold seeds into the initial Cupriavidus nicators, and they're monitoring how much gold seed is on the entire belt down here. So we're doing that with a read all on this belt, and then along here we're saying if there's more than 200, then run, make some more. Good, do that, because then the belt won't jam up, but there'll always be at least 200 on this belt that will be there to allow me to kickstart the system again if it has a crisis. Because I'm expecting in the future that we're going to need quite a lot more plastic than I've necessarily spec'd for at this point, I've then put in a second copy up here, and this is being, as you can see, this one is being a lot busier, so I probably should have come along and looked at this one, because this one's actually flowing and producing plastic. So again, yes, you can see we've got the steady stream of it flowing round and around the outside here. We've got the machines grabbing in reasonably fresh Cupriavidus nicators whenever they're needed. We've got the chemical plant stir it, churning away, producing more of the live stuff, and then that can be unloaded. It comes down here. Any spare is then fed round this way and goes into the machines over here to make plastic, and any of the dead stuff then drops through here, goes onto the other side of this belt, which means it can pour down here, it'll go through this filter, and it'll be fed over here to be made into plastic from this system. So between these ones, we've got quite a lot of capacity for making plastic available, and so I think we should be good whenever we need to expand this. And I think we probably will need to expand it, because one of the things I'm sort of expecting to do at some point in the future is have this planet doing a lot of the blue circuits for other planets, especially once we get some slightly better machines. So at the moment, I'm making processing unit with gold using this recipe, fine, using the steam assembly machines, which is fine, it does work, but they're kind of slow. They run at a speed of 0.5. Oh, they do have module slots in. That's tempting. We should bring some modules over here. Anyway, yes, so that we're currently doing it with these machines. Once we get the electromagnetic plants, these things are, okay, they're only actually 4 times faster, which is less of a bonus than I was expecting. However, they have 5 module slots, so we could get massive productivity boosts out of them, and they have a base productivity boost of 50% anyway. So we could bring these over, we could whack a load of productivity modules in them, we could get their productivity up to sort of 75% probably. So we're almost getting 1 free extra blue circuit for every one we make, and they'll still probably be faster than the current steam assembly machine. So that'll be a massive bonus to us there. And it's still going to be the really cheap recipe that just takes in plastic, gold, basic circuit boards, which is wood and gold, and wood pulp. So this is a really, really cheap way to make blue circuits. And we've got cheap rocket parts on this planet because it's a small moon, so therefore rockets are half the price they would be elsewhere. So given all of that, I can see this planetoid in the future potentially being a source for a lot of the blue circuits for a lot of the rest of the facilities around on other planets. And so that's going to mean some massive expansions needed over here. We're going to need a lot more gold, because eventually gold, as you can see here, gold does become the limiting factor of this factory. So we're going to need to expand that quite a bit, but the rest of it I think is going to be relatively easy. So I can see definite potential for expanding this supply and then feeding all of the other planets with blue circuits from here. Currently, however, we're not feeding blue circuits out from here. The only things that we're launching from here is the steam science. And for the moment, I've put an artificial load on this. And by artificial load, I mean I've got a spaceship up in space that's requesting science packs and then just throwing them overboard into space. So you can see the factory running, because I know it's a lot more interesting to see it going than to look at it when the whole thing's fallen asleep and just isn't doing anything. And so, yes, we are making steam science at what I think is a reasonably good rate. If we follow the belt back, you can see that over here, I've also done quite a lot of improvement and upgrade. So basically, I brought an enormous number of machines over from Norvis. So I've got tier 2 assembly plants pretty much everywhere I can use them. I just did an upgrade of pretty much everything I could find. Also upgraded all of the inserters to electric ones rather than the fueled ones. We've got a lot of belts along here that are unnecessarily fueled now. So this guy here does not need a peat to fuel him to put the lumber into the assembly machine here. But I've left it in there anyway, just because it's easier than going through and removing all of the peat belts from everywhere. That wouldn't really help anything out, so there's no point in changing that. Over here, I've now got blue assembly machines making the wooden circuit boards. I think this is going to be another thing that's going to need to be expanded, especially if we start trying to produce a lot more blue circuits on this planet. However, again, perhaps by then we'll have the EM plants and we'll be able to make these with a productivity bonus and more module slots in them and so on and so on. I seem to have forgotten a pylon here, but never mind. So this area, yes, is going to allow us to make a lot more of the circuits, at least once we have enough gold coming in to keep that fed. There are still a few machines scattered around that are still the old-fashioned steam assembly machines. So the wood pulp, for example, is a poor example, because although this recipe says it can only be done in a steam assembly machine, there is an alternative recipe that takes in steam and can be done in an assembly machine too. So actually I could do some upgrades along here, and I'm honestly not quite sure why I haven't, except that, oh, I do remember actually, yes, it was because it was going to be annoying to plumb in two different pipes into an assembly machine too, I think. Yes, if we do this with an assembly machine too, you have to have the steam pipe on one side and the wood sludge pipe on the other side, and in the available space here that would have been a bit of a faff. And this is the sort of thing that at some point will probably be upgraded at the point when I need more wood pulp supply. But at the moment the machines are basically keeping up. It seems to be kind of okay, although I have noticed that the amount of wood available on the belt does seem to be going down, so the wood input may need a looking at, or at least I may need a faster belt coming up here. Beyond that though, things are ticking over pretty nicely on this planet. As I said, I do think I need to get a bit more gold production up and running over here, and there's a couple of possibilities. Well, actually there seems to be more than enough gold ore coming out at the moment. Oh, and actually it looks like the moist stromatolite remnant processing may be struggling, so I think this belt along through here probably needs to be upgraded so it can pass this through a bit more quickly and pass it down to the additional machines down here. Yes, this belt seems to be the bottleneck. So that needs fixing, but I can do that easily enough with the upgrade planner. We may need to have more crushing and cooking and processing, and then a faster belt through here to get more gold coming through, because that is definitely a bottleneck. Additionally, I'm pretty sure power has been an issue at some points. I am, as usual, running with the lights turned on at the moment, but you can see along here we're getting spikes between the solar and the accumulators. The fact that we're using the accumulators during the day suggests that, yeah, there could be some problems along here with power generation. I think I need to bring in a load more solar panels, a load more accumulators, and just expand this power generation area over here quite a bit. Also, I have a little bit of a concern about the peat. So peat is being dug up merrily over here, and as you can see, it is trundling through a little bit. We've got some flowing away down this belt over here, and there is 93,000 left in this patch over here. We don't use an enormous amount of peat, so I think there's a bit of a drain over here for running all of the burner machinery, so perhaps I should be putting in some electric crushers and electric furnaces over here, and that's the thing I might do when I do a big upgrade of the gold production over here. Whether I then move away from growing gold to just digging it out of the ground, we shall see. But there's a lot of burner machines around here that are gradually chugging through the peat. Over at the other end, I don't remember, are we using any of this for the actual rocket and stuff production? We don't use any for the steam science, which is nice. The steam for that comes from the processing down here. When we dry out the moist stromatolite into peat down here, that produces steam, and we've got plenty of it. So that's okay at the moment, and we can produce it in boilers later if we need to. So there are ways around that. Then over here, well, it doesn't get used for any of this stuff. Ah, yes, we do use it for the rocket fuel. And then a bit of it gets used as well for the starter cultures for Cupriavidus. However, it doesn't get used for actually keeping it running. So if I cut off the supply of the seed, the gold seeds, by producing gold from an actual mine, by digging in the patches I was talking about yesterday, these ones up here, then that'll remove the supply of the gold seeds, and so this is already running, so as long as this carries on going, we won't need to use that, so therefore we won't need to use peat. So that'll make that last a bit longer, so it'll be down to just the rocket fuel. The reason I have this concern is that, yes, okay, there's a patch of peat here that we're digging up. There are a few more inside the walls, actually. There's this one here, which we've now uncovered by pulling out whatever machinery was in here that we don't need anymore. There's also another one down here, so we could dig up that one. And there's another one over here. But that is then it inside the walls. So we've got 100, 200, 370. Call it 700. We've got 700,000 peat inside the walls here. But then after that, there isn't really any particularly close by, and none of them are particularly big patches. So we've got 300,000 down here, 148 down here, 300 down here, 500 down here, there's almost 1 million down here. But these are all quite a long way away. And okay, these enemies aren't particularly scary. We can go out and deal with them without too much difficulty. But it is still going to be, a certain amount of time is going to be required in order to do that sort of expansion. I kind of want to just have this planet tick over and keep working and keep running. So I think it's quite tempting to say, well, before I leave, maybe I should drop in some electric mining drills and get this patch and this patch, because they're absolutely trivial, and probably this one as well. Feed it all down here and onto the bus and just let it use it in whatever order seems sensible. Probably use these ones first and then use this one, because this one is also feeding down to the agricultural systems down here. Maybe I should also go over to electric smelting. Maybe I should, and then if so, and even if I don't, I should then also massively expand the energy production over here. But a lot of this feels like that should be Lignumius Mark Mark 3. So the Mark 1 was just getting us off the planet. The Mark 2 is where it is now, and then Mark 3 is when we really start churning out massive quantities of blue circuits, and at that point we're probably going to need more rocket fuel. That said, by that point, we might be producing crazy amounts of rocket fuel on another planet, and we can just ship that over to here in massive quantities in exchange for sending over blue circuits to that planet. And at that point, we basically won't need the peat anymore. So maybe that's a good way to work around it. Have different planets producing different parts of the rockets. We could even potentially ship in the low density structures, but this is such a good recipe over here as far as I'm concerned that I don't think there's any real need to. Yeah, at this point, I feel like I'm pretty happy with the way Lignumus has come together. I think it's now more or less safe to leave it. I'd like to tweak the power production. I think I might do some work on the gold production as well, make that run a bit faster if I can, ideally without requiring too many more machines. But these are all little tweaks, and to be honest, at the moment, the steam science is being produced and shipped out a lot faster than it would be if we are actually using this planet properly. This is, just as I say, this is a stress test more than actually running properly. And even then, we've still got, well, we've got all the rockets ready. It's just we don't have enough steam science in them for them to be worth launching. And if we look over here at the steam science production, I've got quite a lot of machines in here, and if I slap a rate calculator over them, we can see we're actually making these science packs at 2.7 per second rather than the 1.5, which has been our target. So this is going almost twice as fast as we want it to, in inverted commas. Maybe I should nudge it a little bit so it is actually twice as fast. That would be quite satifying. At that point, I can just say, well, we're producing it twice as fast. That means we've got 100% extra capacity for when we expand other systems. But you know what? If we want to do the science more than twice as fast as we've been speccing it at, then sure, I'll come back here and I'll build up some more. It's not going to be too difficult. But I think having 100% extra on the top being produced is probably going to be enough. And on that note, I think this is a good point to end the video. So thank you very much for watching. We'll be back on Monday when we should be doing some more building work, and by the time you see this video, we may well have found our way out to yet another planet. So make sure you come along at 7:30 PM UK time on Monday to find out what our current crisis of the day is. Then on Wednesday, I'll be back to play some more Foundry. That's at 8 PM UK time, so a little bit later because I have other things going on Wednesday evening. Sorry about that. But I'll be playing some more Foundry then, where I shall be continuing to push out into the unknown, learning new things about the game. That's a sort of very, very Factorio feel at the moment, but it's in a 3D world, which has given me a lot of extra stuff to play with, and that's been good fun too. There'll also be videos coming out on Thursday and Friday, as ever, talking about all the other things that have been going on in the game. So I hope you'll come along for those. Please make sure you subscribe to the channel so you don't miss out on anything, and I'll see you in the next one. Thanks for watching, and goodbye.